Hey, Michael J.
How you doing today?
Excellent. How about you?
I'm like death, but even death will not stop us from a recording.
Yeah, plus, while it is true you may feel like death, you also have the full spoiler in front of you for Eldritch Moon, which means that it's time for full-on brewing season. So there is a real, there's a high floor of how bad it could be, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with that. Like, the card Bedlam Reveler, for example. There's a very high floor as to how bad this card could be. And it could be awesome, though. There's a high ceiling also.
High floor, I think, means the opposite.
Oh.
Bedlam Reveler has a pretty low floor.
It is a low floor?
Because it's an 8-mana card.
Yeah.
So it could be pretty bad. If a card has a lot of potential to be bad, it has a low floor.
But I don't think it could be that bad. But I think
it costs 8.
Sometimes. But
That's
not in Magical
floor.
Christmas Land.
That's not the floor. That's the ceiling.
Okay. I got
There's no question. Bedlam Reveler ceiling is high.
So is this like a Mike Flores card? It has like a very wide range, right? Like it can have a very low floor. Yeah, it has a pretty good ceiling. But it has a very low floor, but it could also be spectacular. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's not as low a floor as, say, One with Nothing. One with Nothing's floor is pretty bad. Phage the Untouchable. That has a really bad
floor.
Yeah, so Bedlam Reveler is 6 red for a 3/4, and it costs 1 less. It's a fake 8 mana. It costs 1 less for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. And then it has Prowess, and when it enters the battlefield, discard your hand and draw 3 cards. So there's really 2 parts of this card to unpack, right? It's a 3/4 Prowess that costs an amount that is inversely proportionate to your instants and sorceries in your graveyard. And then it's also discard your hand and draw 3 cards.
So, this is the kind of card that benefits from a lot of setup. So if you spent your first 6 spells just lightning bolting people, or I don't know, whatever, lightning bolting their creatures or spreading them or whatever, then it costs 2 and then draws 3 cards, right? So it could have as good of text as 2 mana being RR, 3/4 Prowess, draw 3 cards.
It can get slightly better than that.
Better than that? Oh, how?
Yes. What if the last card in your hand is Fiery Temper?
Okay. Then
right? That's a real thing, right?
That's a thing. Sure.
Right, because I could imagine, there's a lot of potential for, red-green or red-blue to play with some Madness cards in decks that have lots of sorceries and instants, and that have realistic chances of emptying their hand and wanting to have a card like this that you can spend just a small amount of mana, draw some extra cards, and potentially, and this is the part that I really appreciate, by the time you can actually get your hand down, get this guy's cost low enough to play from all the instants and sorceries in your graveyard, you can get his cost to be so low that you have extra mana in that same turn.
Cast more of those cards you just drew, yeah.
Exactly. And to cast some of the Madness cards you're discarding. Because one of the bottlenecks with discard outlets is so often that you just don't have the mana to also play the Madness cards. And with Bedlam Reveler, it's actually quite easy if you discard your last whatever number of cards, if they include anything from Fiery Temper to any of the various vampires or whatever, you could potentially save a little bit of mana here and there and get a little bit of extra upside. But the main thing that you're really trying to do is to use this guy as a sort of Tarmogoyf, right?
Yeah.
A Tarmogoyf that draws 3 cards, or some number of cards.
Well, and it's a red Tarmogoyf also, a red Tarmogoyf. So here's how I look at this card. A lot of the applications that you just talked about sound like standard applications to me, right? Fiery Temper, it's kind of a standard card. I was actually thinking this card might be more relevant in Modern or even Legacy.
This card's absurd in powered formats, right?
I think so. I mean,
good.
Those are the formats with all the lightning bolts and chain lightnings.
And Gitaxian Probe and Thought Scour.
Wow, I actually hadn't gone to the level of ambition of a second color. but I see where you're going on this one.
Wait, you want to play mono red?
I thought, drawing 3 more lightning bolts is pretty good.
Dude, you gotta dream bigger. Dude, this is like a 3/4 prowess for 2 mana that lets you discard your hand and draw 3 cards. That's exactly what a blue-red deck might want. This is Treasure Cruise, and you get a body.
It is Treasure Cruise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Patrick, do you remember the Zoo deck you played in Modern a few months ago?
The Teamer one.
Yeah. Do you think that deck could be good instead of having Tarmogoyf, having a card like Bedlam Reveler, and then just being blue-red with Snapcaster Mage and Abbott, or is that silly?
Yeah. So the tough thing about those kind of decks is that and this is like, it's more like the blue-red sort of, like when you move away from Rancor and Tarmogoyf and Mishra's Bauble, because you would want to move away from Mishra's Bauble, I think, when you're counting sorceries and instants for Bedlam Reveler.
Yeah, that's also no Tarmogoyf, right? Tarmogoyf would get a benefit from an artifact.
Right, exactly. So Bedlam Reveler is it's another creature. And that deck already had access to Storm Chaser Mage, which is another nice addition. And so when you have Monastery Swift Spear as a dynamite 1-drop, and then it falls off after that, I mean, you have access to Delver of Secrets and Grimoire of Amancer, so it's not like the options for other 1-drops are bad, but they're not in the same league as Monastery Swift Spear for the purposes of that deck strategy. The cards that cost 2 or 3, you've already got Storm Chaser Mage, Snapcaster Mage. If you want Jory Ruin Diver, yeah. Or you've got, if you want Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. Just really depends on what you want to. Abbott of Carol Keep is totally an option. But Bedlam Reveler, I think, could fit into a strategy like that in terms of really helping take advantage of playing the tempo game. When you're playing with stuff like Vapor Snag, Bedlam Reveler is really friends with Vapor Snag.
Man, Vapor Snag is unbelievable with Bedlam Reveler, right?
Both ways.
Yeah, it's both like its primary function of being an unsummon, and it tings you for damage, and it's a dark ritual, right? Like.
Right, but then also the upside of being able to Vapor Snag your own Bedlam Reveler.
Oh, yeah.
As a draw 3.
Especially in, like, some crazy situation, right? Like, where you can maybe evade a removal spell or something like that. Or just as a draw 3 is fine, I guess.
And it's important to note that Bedlam Reveler, while he behaves in many ways sort of like a Gurmag Angler or a Tasigur, like it's kind of like a Tasigur, where you're getting cards in your graveyard to make him cheaper, he doesn't exile the cards, so the second Bedlam Reveler is just as cheap, if not cheaper.
Yeah, I think that drawing a Bedlam Reveler off of a Bedlam Reveler is a thing that will happen.
Oh, yeah. But the fact that he's already a 3/4 is really nice for making it so that you don't have to worry about, Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix type of stuff. But he also can win a decent number of fights. It's also really nice that he actually is just the perfect size body to get into battles with Tasigur, with Tarmogoyf. Like, the fact that even Gurmag Angler and Siege Rhino, all these things. So when you attack with a Bedlam Reveler, or if your opponent has a Siege Rhino, if you have 2 mana open, can they attack into your Bedlam Reveler? Like, you can attack with your Bedlam Reveler if you have no cards in your hand, and you draw a card for the turn, and your opponent has a 3/4 Tarmogoyf, you can just attack with your Reveler. What are they going to do?
I mean, nobody blocks there.
And so the fact that he's already such a healthy body, but gets into meaningful, showdowns with some of the popular creatures, I think is going to be a big deal. I think that Bedlam Reveler, the fact that he's double red, it puts a lot of pressure on you to not play 3 colors.
Well, I was talking about playing him in a 1-color deck.
Yeah, but that's just silly.
That's silly. Okay.
I mean, you can do that, but man, blue. If you're going to go to the trouble of playing this guy in Modern, that said, there is something to the fact that Bedlam Reveler is good friends with Blood Moon. Like, I think that there's going to be some sort of blue-red deck, possibly mono-red, but like more likely blue-red, just because blue is like the best way to get lots of sorceries and instants, that uses Blood Moon And it's nice that Bedlam Reveler, you can discard the Blood Moon and keep getting more velocity, but you can also just use Blood Moon as a way to slow people down, and Bedlam Reveler kill them fast.
Yeah, it's hard for them to react. Unless they've got cards like Dismember, right?
They
might not be able to cast their cards easily.
Well, but Bedlam Reveler actually is not the worst against Dismember either. It's not out of the question to imagine that you could have two instants, particularly if you play with Mutagenic Growth in your deck. And I could definitely imagine a style of aggressive Bedlam Reveler deck that uses Mutagenic Growth, which plays so well with so many of the prowess creatures.
Oh, I mean,
but also it's a dark ritual for this guy.
Mutagenic Growth and Monastery Swift Spear on turn. It's kind of filthy, isn't it?
Oh yeah, without question.
That's so filthy.
Yeah.
Like you're like they're like Mountain, you're like Mountain Swift Spear in, and you're like tapped, right? And then they're like Lightning Bolt your Swift Spear, and you're like, nuh-uh. Take, what is that, 4?
Yeah.
Nuh-uh, take 4 is just
0 mana, counter the best card in your deck, and also you take 4.
That's just disgusting.
The Bedlam Reveler, though, I think is more than just a standard. I mean, I think it's going to be a legacy and modern card. And it actually might have chances in Vintage too. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, but I think that it's hard because the double red lowers the probability a little bit. But in Standard, this card has reason to be worked on in Standard as well. I mean, it's not a given that you just always have 6 instants and sorceries in your graveyard, but you can trend in that direction.
Well, you can also just make slight changes to your strategy that are going to make it a little bit better for Bedlam Reveler. Like, for example, if you have the option between Oath of Nissa and Traverse the Uvenwald, and you're going to play, like, let's say a green-red deck, just choose Traverse the Uvenwald. That's better with Bedlam Reveler. These are 2 cards that have very similar functions that have been dealt with in a semi-interchangeable way in Standard in the last couple of months.
Sure. Yeah, I'm... I don't know. I think this is going to be an interesting one to work with, but I think that it lends itself well to a deck that has an aggressive bent, but sometimes wants to grind it out a little bit, play a little bit of a mid-range game. I think this one is a hit.
I love how a card like this can combine with cards like Goblin Dark Dwellers and Kolaghan's Command. You just snowball so many advantages. Like, all the cards are good by themselves, and then they're just like, they just get so good.
I am a little suspicious of Goblin Dark Dweller and Bedlam Reveler in the same deck, though.
Really?
Because I think it can totally work, for sure. It can. But I'm suspicious that it's the place you want to start, because Bedlam Reveler wants to be the top of your curve. You really want Bedlam Reveler to be the last card you play. And
until one of the next 3 cards.
Yeah, what I mean is the last card in your hand. Like, unless you're discarding like a Fiery Temper or something to save mana, basically you want to play all your cards and then play your Reveler. And so Goblin Dark Dweller is rarely the end. Because usually whenever you Goblin Dark Dweller, it begets something else. Like, it's the engine, right?
Yeah, but the goal of the Goblin Dark Dweller is to keep chaining more spells.
Right. So I'm not 100% sure that those 2 work together so perfectly, but they might. It might also just be that you can afford to have more of both because the format ends up so grindy.
What's awesome about Bedlam Reveler, in addition, is that even though its functional casting cost is often going to be circa 2, you can Eldritch Evolution it as though it were an 8, which lets you go to 10s, or 9s or whatever if you wanted.
Yeah, and it's also, it counts as an 8 for anything that cares about total converted mana cost, even though it comes down so cheap. So if you...
Like a Sorin?
Yeah, exactly. Anything like that, you can get some big hits. But actually, speaking of Goblin Dark Dweller, there's a card in the set that looks really exciting as a potential option for certain types of Goblin Dark Dweller decks. What do you think of Collective Defiance? So 1 red sorcery, escalate 1, choose 1 or more, target player discards all the cards in his or her hand and draws that many cards. Collective Defiance deals 4 damage to target creature. Collective Defiance deals 3 damage to target opponent.
I think this card is obviously outstanding. Right? So, let's say you didn't cast any escalates, right? You were just going, target player discards all the cards in his or her hand, then draws that many cards. Isn't this basically Wheel of Fortune, then?
No.
No?
Wheel of Fortune draws 7.
Oh, draws 7. Okay. It's still good.
It's also target player. This isn't both players.
Yeah, you could do it to them, right?
You could do it to them to disrupt them, which is kind of interesting and really going to mean. I mean, you're not going to commonly just lead on turn 3 with, boom, gotcha. But there are times where you know somebody's hand because they soar into something, or you saw from some card that let you see their hand from like a duress, a transgress the mind, whatever. There's going to be times where they have a card in their hand and you'd rather just spin the wheel. But more commonly, you're doing it to yourself in order to get rid of extra land or trigger madness cards or try to just find something that can actually solve the problem that you're facing, or just to slightly increase velocity, just to do something, because often the opportunity cost is low because you're playing it primarily as a deal for, like it's a lot like Exquisite Firecraft, right? But so Exquisite Firecraft is 3 mana deal 4, and then it has the upside of under, if you have Spell Mastery, it's uncounterable. Collective Defiance, it is a 3 mana deal 4, but it has a little bit of a drawback in that you can only do 3 to the opponent's face instead of 4.
But it's also 4 mana 7, right?
That's the big thing. The most, the big part about Collective Defiance that I think means this card is going to be just phenomenal is that you're also getting Searing Blaze. You can deal, for 4 mana, you can deal 4 damage to a creature and 3 damage to face. That's so good. And 4 is such an important number to be able to do in a lot of circumstances. Like Archangel Avacyn costs 4. The ability to just face and kill a creature, though, it's also a big deal because of Planeswalkers. There's times where you want to kill their Sylvan Advocate and you want to kill their Jace Vryn's Prodigy. And Collective Defiance can do both. Yeah. And there are times where going long, you just have the extra option, of the make somebody draw a new hand.
You also, I think, going long, you can just sandbag lands. Like, let's say you have too many lands. Like, if you're going to do something else anyway, it's a fine thing to transform 2 mountains into, potentially fuel. Yeah.
Yep. But this is a nice one to Goblin Dark Dweller because one of the things that's kind of interesting is the having extra cards that cost 3 in your deck to be able to trigger to bring back.
So how does that work? Can you only choose one, or can you escalate it if it's getting Dark Dwellered?
Yeah, so Collective Defiance's converted mana cost is 3 no matter how many modes are chosen. I mean, this is just one of the examples they gave in the release notes, because this is actually worded differently than certain other effects. Like, it's not the same as Fireball, for instance. It's an additional cost, and additional costs don't affect a spell's converted mana cost at all. But the big thing here with Goblin Dark Dweller specifically is that if you got that kind of mana, you still have to pay the mana if you want to escalate it. But if you've got like 7 mana, for instance, you can go Goblin Dark Dweller all 3 modes on Collective Defiance.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting, right?
Yeah, I keep going back to Goblin Dark Dweller kind of Exquisite Firecraft builds, at least, from brainstorming or brewing stuff up in Standard. Kind of inspired by Tomohiro Saito's blue-red deck, the one that has a Gold Knight Castigator, and in the sideboard he had Goblin Dark Dweller. Yep. I think like that kind of a deck is really, or I mean, not necessarily that kind of a deck now, but like just the notion of
some of those interactions,
cards, are really, really powerful, and to some degree, it's a wing of Standard where everybody knows what the cards are, they just don't play them together very much, and I think that you win a lot of games if you have very good cards in your deck and simultaneously can attack the metagame or attack your opponents in a way that they weren't anticipating very, very efficiently. Right? I think that's That mostly works when you start out with good cards. And these are all great cards. So
Yeah. Hey, so what do you think of Stensia Banquet? 2 in a red, sorcery. Stensia Banquet deals damage to target opponent equal to the number of vampires you control.
Draw a card.
Draw a card's a pretty important part of that.
Well, so there's 2 things going on. One of them is, obviously, this scales based on how many vampires you have. And maybe you'll have a lot, maybe you won't have a lot. But that draw card clause is like, that's just like the savior of all kinds of abeyances. That, you just have this terrible draw, you know what's going on, and you could just turn 3 cast this thing. Maybe you're not dealing very much damage, maybe you're not dealing even a single damage, you could draw a card. That said, I think, is there a vampire token maker in Standard?
Oh yeah, there's a couple, but they're not that. You're not going to go that wide. So the 2 main vampire. So there's the Call of the Bloodline, 1 in a black for an enchantment that you can pay 1 and discard a card once per turn to get a 1/1.
Yeah, that's not super
life
wide.
steal vampire. That's not super wide, no. And I think that realistically, you're not going to have that many vampires in play. But it is a potential option, particularly if you want to go after, if you just want a little bit of extra reach. I'm a little concerned that it's a little slow because I feel like the vampires are likely to be tempo based, a little more aggressive. However, one possible home for Stensia Banquet is in a mono red vampires deck. You can actually play mono red vampires with 4 Insolent Neonate and 4 drops, and at 2 playing like maybe 4 Ravenous Bloodseeker. Maybe there's a new one. There's a new one that's worth putting in the mix here. That's 2 in a red for a what is this guy's 2 in a red for a 3/2. Stromkirk Occultist, which is a vampire horror. It's 2 in a red for a 3/2 trample. Whenever Stromkirk Occultist deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of their library. Until end of turn, of your library. Sorry. Until end of turn, you may play that card, and it has madness of 1 in a red.
This is a really interesting card.
Oh yeah.
So it's very Ophidian-esque, but it has way bigger, right? Offensively, it has trample. Yep. Trample on a 3/2 is that's a thing, and
particularly with the Ophidian aspect of it, because if your opponent blocks and it tramples over, you still get your card.
Yeah, even if they trade, right?
And this is an excellent card to target with something like a Titan Strength. Or in the case of a Madness deck, there's a decent chance that they're going to want the +2/+2 Madness aura, from Shadows over Innistrad. So this is a pretty respectable card, but it's also just a 2 mana 3/2 trample whenever you're on the Madness type of space.
So to come back to Stensia Banquet, the thing that I don't like about it is it's red. And I get you're talking about...
It's much better that it's red than it being white, given that it counts vampires.
Well, what I'm saying is, in another context, if this card were white, it would be awesome, right? I don't know, just say
if it said humans?
Yeah, it's like knights or something, humans. And then wow, that'd be a spectacular card if that were in white. But because it's in red, we're talking about a card here that costs 3, right? Sure, it says draw a card on it. But how much damage are you really going to reach for? 3, 4? How wide are we going? We just talked about a card that for 3 mana can deal 4 or 3, and for 4 mana can deal 7.
Right.
And sure, it doesn't say draw a card, but at the same time, it doesn't tie your hands together, forcing you to play all these vampires. So that's I think the sticking point. The fact that it is red. Yeah, if this were white and it was knights or humans or something, I think it would be a spectacular card, or at least very interesting. Imagine, they could never put it there because of token producers are too efficient in white right now. But yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think it asks it could be powerful, but it asks a lot. When we were talking about the range on a card, the floor on this card is not that bad because because of draw card. The ceiling is obviously spectacular, but I think the average value is going to be pretty low.
Yeah, me too. So speaking of a card that has a high ceiling, actually, what do you think of Mirror Wing Dragon? 3 red for a 4/5 flying dragon. Whenever any player, you or your opponent, whenever any player casts an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Mirror Wing Dragon, that player copies that spell for each other creature he or she controls that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures.
This is such an interesting card. It's such a head-scratcher of a card. When I first saw this card, I thought that it was just a spiteful card. And that I spent 5 mana for a dragon, and when my opponent, casts an ultimate price or a ruinous path on it or something, it at least killed all their guys.
Right.
That's where I started with. But then I thought, you know what? What if I'm even a little wide, and instead I'm casting a Titan Strength on Mirror Wing Dragon? It's interesting.
If you have 4 Zaedra Hedron Grinders and 4 Mirror Wing Dragons, you've got a lot of potential ways to fork your spells ad nauseum. And you know what's even better than copying a bazillion pump spells? Copying 1-mana cantrips. There's the Slip Through Space, blue sorcery. Target creature is unblockable this turn. Draw a card.
Yep.
And then there's the one that gives haste for just a single red mana, and you draw a card. And so if you have Mirror Wing Dragon, you can actually copy your 1-mana cantrips. You draw a card for every single creature you have, and it's a trigger. So that, if you have the Mirror Wing Dragon, by the time you play the 1-mana spell that draws a card, by the time you slip through space it, your opponent can't fizzle it by killing the dragon.
Because it's already put on the stack.
Right, it's a trigger.
Other creatures. They can fizzle it by killing all your other creatures, actually.
Right. Well, but the thing is that if they ultimate price your Mirror Wing Dragon, it's only their guys that are dying.
Correct.
Because, you only copy all the spells for your own guys, no matter which player you are. But yeah, if they literally had enough kill spells to kill all your other creatures, they could. But the prospect of playing with 4 Mirror Wing Dragons and 4 Zaedra Hedron Grinders opens up the possibility, a very real possibility, of being able to just draw tons of cards with those 2 different cantrips, the targeting cantrips. And it's also not trivial that Mirror Wing Dragon is a 4/5 flyer. I mean, that's a decent body. It beats a lot of things. You could play with a deck. You might have a deck that has 4 Thunderbreak Regents, 4 Mirror Wing Dragons, and 4 Silumgar Scorn, and you just wanted to be I just need another dragon. And incidentally, Mirror Wing Dragon combos great with some cantrips and some pump spells that I play for whatever reason. For instance, you could potentially play, if you were able to put +1/+1 counters on it in some way, it's hard to make Dramoka's Command really work, but it's just, I think this is an interesting card that there's a decent chance it's not actually the right way, but it has very above average chances of being sick if you have the right combination.
Yeah, I think the chances are low that it's going to be a popular staple. But I think that it's going to have very interesting specific applications.
It's particularly nice if on turn 6 you drop the Mirror Wing Dragon and give it haste, draw a tons of cards, but then you're also just bashing your opponent with Mirror Wing Dragon.
That's awesome. I kind of want to feel like I want to play a bunch of tokens, right? Because that's the best way to get a bunch of guys.
Oh, yeah, and there's a lot of good stuff like P and Kira Noir. P and Kira Noir is a great friend to Mirror Wing Dragon.
Oh, yeah, good setup, man.
What about Nahari's Wrath? The new Firestorm of sorts.
I think this card is the dumbest.
The dumbest which way?
It just I would. That's it. The dumbest. That's what I think.
Like it's you want to play with it? It's powerful.
I think it's very interesting. Like
very interesting is what you mean by the dumbest. I'll have to remember that.
Very interesting and the dumbest. And so Nahiri's Wrath costs 2 to red. It has the text. It's a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast Nahiri's Wrath, discard X cards. So there's actually a lot of thought you have to. The first time you cast this, you have to put into this. Nahiri's Wrath deals damage equal to the total converted mana cost of the discarded cards to each of up to X target creatures and or planeswalkers. So if you're going to destroy is the wrong word. If you're going to target like 2 planeswalkers, you need to discard at least 2 cards, right? Or a creature and 3 planeswalkers, you need to discard 4 cards, right? That's the limit. No matter what the casting cost of those cards is, like you could discard a land which has casting cost of 0. But you need to discard the card in order for the targeting criteria, right? But then, discarding the cards, it cares about how big the cards are, and it can do substantial damage based on that. Like, so if you're discarding huge cards like Emrakul, things could be taking 13. I think the card is cool in that if you're going to destroy, like, a key permanent, a large creature, especially a planeswalker, you were going to spend a card on it anyway. And if you're going to destroy multiple, like the additional card of Nahiri's Wrath itself, at some point becomes, the fact that it's a card that you're going to be down on becomes less of a factor, I think. And then plus you have the ability to do upside with cards like Fiery Temper. Fiery Temper is a really interesting card here because it's a card. It helps with your targeting criteria. It has a converted mana cost of 3, which, now that Nahiri's Wrath cares about the 3, but then it does an additional 3, potentially because of the madness.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about the Bedlam, the Bedlam Reveler.
Yep.
Earlier, that guy. Once you discard a Bedlam Reveler, you are effectively ensuring that every card you discard is a hero's downfall.
Oh,
right?
Wow, yeah.
So, like, so if you discard a Bedlam Reveler, Nahiri's Wrath lets you kill as many creatures and planeswalkers as you want for 0 mana, just discarding cards for each one. Second, when you have Bedlam Reveler, you love having an empty hand besides Bedlam Reveler. If you Nahiri's Wrath on turn 3, you can discard all your cards except for the Bedlam Reveler. And then on turn 4, cast Bedlam Reveler and draw a new hand.
You're essentially up, right? So you went down by a card and change because you discard one more card, or you use one more card being the Nahiri's Wrath more than whatever you were destroying. However, the Bedlam Reveler gets you back 3 cards. So
right, you have the Reveler.
Yeah, it was just like kind of ritualing. What's another interesting card to throw away with Nahiri's Wrath is Avacyn's Judgment. That card has like a base casting cost of 2, right? But then it has a way crazy, gigantic madness ability, right? So, I think this card again is the dumbest. I think it will be heavily played.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with Nahiri's Wrath: it's like a hero's downfall for 3 mana, but you're down a card, and you have to have expensive cards. But it scales super, super, super hard because very quickly you're just killing as many creatures and planeswalkers as you want per card. So I feel like, I mean, this card is like, it's very easy to make this big enough to kill, like, whatever. And, I mean, I feel like this, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a really powerful card to negate also. But this card seems like it has the potential to be a very, very just defining card. And this is we're not even counting weird, wacky combos, right? Like if you play Legacy, you can just Nahiri's Wrath your Mog Maniac and deal 20 damage to your opponent on, as soon as you can cast these 2 cards. And if you just play with a bunch of rituals, you're probably, you could very easily, it is not hard to imagine that you could just kill your opponent on the second turn. But at least in Legacy, they have stuff like Force of Will. Because remember, even though Nahiri's Wrath doesn't do damage to a player's face, you can damage your own Mog Maniac, and all the damage gets redirected to the face.
Wow, it's just...
And in Modern, it's more expensive and probably not good enough just because it costs so much. But you can target a stuffy doll in Modern and take out your opponent pretty hardcore.
What about just cards people play that aren't too fancy, like Boros Reckoner
would be
and Blasphemous Act?
Dude, if you just discard Blasphemous Act, you're getting an enormous amount of damage added. And Boros Reckoner is a much better Mog Maniac. That's the new hotness in Modern. Like you Boros Reckoner with Nahiri's Wrath?
Because you already play all these cards, right? Like
you could totally justify playing those cards.
We looked at that Spread Red deck. They had every freaking Pyroclasm you could play in Modern, except for Kozilek's Return, which is actually intuitively would have been one of the best ones to play. But you could just... I think this is a straight in... Combines awesomely with Blasphemous Act and Boros Reckoner. And... it's interesting. It gives that deck a completely different dimension other than just killing their creatures and having some pretty good threats.
That's definitely exciting. So yeah, I think Nahiri's Wrath is... It is confusing just how incredibly powerful... This card is...
It's really powerful.
This is a really powerful card, and it seems like it has the potential to be a revolutionary card in a variety of formats. It depends on the support. This is going to be near the top of the list to start brewing with early to understand the implications of, you know? Like, it's not pure upside where it's, like, guaranteed that it's going to be dominant. But I think it's going to be quite good, and it might be... I think it has good chances of being a defining card if it just so happens that what you want is this incredible tempo play of being able to pitch cards that have a disproportionately high casting cost. You know, basically, if you can drop Nahiri's Wrath on turn 4 and kill 3 permanents, that tempo edge sometimes is going to just be too unbeatable.
I just think it's just normal mode. Like, doesn't necessarily have to be combining with Boros Reckoner or whatever. It's probably going to be really good in Standard. Like, it's really powerful. Like, if you just think about the things that you can do with it, the ability to translate damage directly into dead planeswalkers it's not a trivial thing. Like, the number of red cards that can easily kill a planeswalker, especially for like 3 mana, there's not that many. Right, like most of the time in Standard right now, if you just have an Exquisite Firecraft, which is an excellent Magic card, you can't even kill a Planeswalker, probably more than half the time. And I think that the fact that you have this and it smashes fatties, smashes whatever,
multiple Planeswalkers at the same time. The thing is, though,
easily execute like Ob Nixilis and Chandra, right? And if you're in a situation where you're behind Ob Nixilis and Chandra, I'm guessing you're very willing to throw away one extra card.
I just think it's important to keep in mind that this card necessarily requires expensive cards.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So Nahiri's Wrath it's more for... you don't have to be playing Eldrazi. I mean, it works great with Eldrazi. You don't have to. You could be playing like Sorin and Chandra and Ob Nixilis of your own. Goblin Dark Dweller. These are all fine cards to discard, and obviously Goblin Dark Dweller has the chance of flashing this one back. But I think that you do got to be careful because Nahiri's Wrath is not a good top deck in a lot of scenarios.
Nope.
So you got to make sure that you are doing it with purpose. What do you think of Incendiary Flow?
I think we're on the same. Yeah. Like that's the next card I wanted to talk about too. I think this card is awesome. It's like Volcanic Hammer, but a little bit better.
Yeah. It's a Volcanic Hammer, but it also exiles the creature, which is kind of nice when there's graveyard recursion sometimes, and so it's just kind of nice sometimes to get to have it be gone.
Eminently playable Magic card.
Yep.
I think it's going to be a 4 of in a lot of decks.
Yeah, a lot of red decks are starving for some face damage. They're so used to having to play with things like Outnumber or Fiery Impulse. So having a good rate burn spell that goes to the face it's a welcome addition.
One of my all-time favorite stories is, do you remember, I think it was Regionals 2007 when you made the Corlash deck?
Yeah.
And you had Volcanic Hammer in the sideboard, like a couple copies, just because...
Well, that was your awesome technology.
Well, but, you just want to kill Scab Clan Maulers, right?
That's exactly... I said, dude, how can I kill Scab Clan Mauler? And you said, well, you could play with Volcanic Hammer.
So, Paul Jordan played your deck at Regionals, and... He just comes up to me after this round, and he's like, I won. You won't believe how. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, he's playing against this beatdown deck. He just had he has had a pretty good tempo draw, right? And then, what did you have to draw cards in that deck? Was it like Compulsive Research something?
Yeah, Compulsive Research was the big one.
He's just like...
And there was also 1 4C. It was like 4 Compulsive Research, 1 4C.
So he's like, in mid-game, just like complete attrition against like a green-red deck. Obviously, he sided Volcanic Hammers in. Cast Compulsive Research. He draws 2 Volcanic Hammers. He's just like, looks at his Volcanic Hammers, looks at his opponent, he's just like, 6. That was the match.
Nice.
Because you just never do that with that deck, right? Like, this kind of card is only used to defend yourself against Scab Clan Maulers. But there's this other mode. Even control decks can use it that way.
Yep. Particularly if there's some kind of a more tap-out style that emerges. Because there's a few different reasons to want to play a more tap-out style of deck. Stuff like Take Inventory and Incendiary Flow. It doesn't have to be some it doesn't have to be some like that it's a sorcery blacklists it from the control deck. You can just spend on turn 4 spend 2 mana to an Incendiary Flow a threat and still have 2 mana open.
Yeah, I love the attitude that you take so often with new cards where people are like, Incendiary Flow is so much worse than Incinerate. Take Inventory is so much worse than Accumulated Knowledge. Well, you know what? Take Inventory is 100 times better than the Accumulated Knowledge we had yesterday, right? Maybe it's not the best, but it's a real card. And
also, dude, I don't want my Accumulated Knowledge to get dispelled. Take Inventory can't get dispelled.
No.
It's got something going for it.
It'd make you get Warping Wailed, though.
Yeah, that's true. Dude, we've been talking about some of these cards that have like alternate casting costs that are actually like secretly cheaper than they look. We got to go back to Emerge because now that they've spoiled more of the Emerge cards, well, all of them, there's some important ones to talk about. Which one do you have your eye on the most?
Well, there are 2 Emerge cards I think that really warrant a lot of discussion. And we touched on Emerge last week, but I feel much more having put more thought into them this week. I'd say Distended Mindbender and Elder Deep Fiend are, I think, the 2 premier Emerge cards. Other than Decimator Provinces, I think is gonna have its day in end games. But I think just Distended Mindbender and Elder Deep Fiend, even though they cost 8, like the setups are so easy for them, and then they have these amazing like turn 3, turn 4 sequences that are just gonna happen. So, for example, like if you just go like Nissa or Pilgrim's Eye on turn 3, like a value generating.
Yes, Pilgrim's Eye. You got it, Pilgrim's
Eye, right?
Sure. The format staple.
A value generating 3-drop.
Yes.
Right? Then you just play your 4th land, which you got with your Pilgrim's Eye, probably a spell, maybe an island, and then you get these cards that are like pretty big for 4 mana, right? And then you get like a 5-power creature, and then you get like a really powerful ability, right? Like the abilities on both Elder Deep Fiend and Descended Mindbender are game swinging abilities potentially.
Yeah, Elder Deep Fiend is the one that I'm instantly just like, oh my god,
this is flash.
That it is a 5/6 flash creature is so big of a deal for multiple reasons. To begin with, when your opponent kills your creature, they kill your Nissa, and you get to flash this down.
Oh my god!
Right,
that's unreal.
But then, second of all, when you cast Elder Deep Fiend, tap up to 4 target permanents. You can do this during your opponent's upkeep. You go turn 3 Nissa, and then on turn 4, when they only have 3 mana, you can Elder Deep Fiend, tap all 3 of their land and their 1 creature. Tap them out completely before they got a chance to Coco or whatever. And you just have a 5/6 in play. And you sacrifice the cantrip creature anyway, but you time walked them, and it's a misbind click that can't be beaten with a removal spell. Not only can it not be beaten with a removal spell, it's a win cast trigger. Your opponent doesn't even beat it if they have a counter spell.
So, yeah, that's a huge deal. With the tactical implications are so cool in this card. Like, let's say your opponent's, they're on stock green-white, which is like one of the best decks. So well performing the past couple of months, and they're like, they've got their draw, right? They're like, Nissa token, Gideon token. You're 3-drop, play your 4th land. They're like, activate my Gideon, truck. You block their Gideon with your 2/2 or whatever, your 1/1, your value 3, and then you play an Elder Deep Fiend. You could tap some of their lands depending on what will happen, but you could tap all their potential blockers and just execute their Planeswalker next turn.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
I mean, you don't even have to block with a 2/2. If you want, you can actually just block with the Elder Deep Fiend.
Oh, yes, I guess you could certainly do that. That's less dramatic than mine, I think. But it might be more effective, especially if you got to, I don't know, eat the night.
Yeah, I mean, you might just tap their guys with the Elder Deep Fiend. Just tap Gideon and tap the Knights. Whatever you want.
Oh, wow, yours is way better than mine. Well, I mean, I don't know. In mine, maybe we won't get surprised by an Avacyn. But that might also happen in
well, tap some of their lands.
Tap
You're in the middle
one
of
their lands, right? That's enough. Oh, 1 land in the middle of combat is certainly enough to keep Avacyn off your back. Oh, man, this card can tap down Profane Princes.
Yes.
I just write down any card that can handle a Profane Prince, even temporarily.
So this card is an Eldrazi that costs 7 or more. When you play an Elder Deep Fiend, you can search your deck for another Elder Deep Fiend if you have a Sanctum of Ugin. You can just chain these.
I mean, that's not really fair.
No, and
it's chaining misbind clicks, but they're 5/6, and they're just eating value.
They can tap creatures also, though.
Yeah.
The
fact that they tap down defenders, you just execute. I think this card is like one of the cards that we just like a Planeswalker Doomer, and also like I guess opponent Doomer. Like just the ability to steal somebody. It's like a time walk, right? Like if you do this on their upkeep, like you said before. You can steal their turn because they or most of their turn. But you know that desperate mid-game position where you're like, I need to rip my X land, and then they rip it, and then you're like, hold in your draw step, tap down your lands. They're like,
yes,
no! And then it's not. Also, this will also return causal X return, right?
And it's a 5/6, so it lives through it, and it's a flash creature, so you can actually just flash it down. And then trigger your Causal X return as an instant. Like in the middle of combat, it's not as if it wasn't enough to tap 4 permanents, like they're all their land. You can also deal 5 damage at instant speed because this is an instant speed Eldrazi that costs 7 or more.
My assessment is this card is very good.
Yeah, this card is fantastic. And we're not even done yet. This guy so if you have Elder Deep Fiend, it makes an incidental shrine of the Forsaken Gods better. If you have Elder Deep Fiend, you can literally go turn 3 Nissa, turn 4 Elder Deep Fiend, tap all their land, untap Eldritch Evolution, and just go get Kozilek or Ulamog if you want.
Oh, that's really unreal.
And that's just like normal. That's just like you just played a normal card on turn 3 and a normal card on turn 4. If this card is normal, because this is a Transformer sound Magic card. Oh my god, dude! Elder Deep Fiend is going to be a very, very, very important card. But I do think this is a good example of the type of card that can subtly create ripples in some of the other cards that people play. Like, for instance, Transgress the Mind. how much better is Transgress the Mind now that Distended Mindbender and Elder Deep Fiend are in the equation?
Well, because you got to get rid of those kind of things. Because even the situation that you just described, if you go like Nissa or Pilgrim's Eye into Elder Deep Fiend, it's very difficult for the opponent to defend themselves. Because one of the things that's happening is the trigger is they're getting their lands tapped, right?
Right.
So their ability to react is blunted, right? It's not zero. You know, if they have a stasis snare or something, they can add mana to their mana pool and stasis snare your Elder Deep Fiend, which will make it more difficult for you to cast your Eldritch Evolution next turn. But like they're getting messed up on these cards before the Elder Deep Fiend or the Distended Mindbender are actually reaching play, because these are cast triggers. It's different when some of those things are happening with entries to the battlefield. So, yes, to go back to your point, that particular discard spell is even better than it was, and it was already good.
So how good do you think Distended Mindbender is in Modern?
In
Modern.
Thinking about it mostly for Standard, but...
I'm talking in Modern or Legacy.
Legacy?
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Gurmag Angler or Tasigur. If you have a Tasigur, your Distended Mindbender costs a single black mana.
Oh. You can reduce the emerge cost with their colored mana symbols, too. That's so filthy.
No, it's just creatures converted mana cost.
Oh.
No, I'm sorry. It does cost 2, though. But either way, just having the fact that Gurmag Angler and Tasigur can come down for just 2 mana. For 2, you can pay 1 mana for your Tasigur, and it effectively is saving you 5 mana for your Distended Mindbender. That's huge. That's huge.
It's especially huge if you've duressed them just now to make sure that they have sweet stuff to take.
Right. I mean, you're going to rip apart their ability to counterplay. I mean, don't get me wrong, a Distended Mindbender is not that much bigger than a Tasigur, right? But like the disruption is like a very real thing, right?
Like,
and
it's like a super high value him to Torok. Like it's like double coercion, basically.
So I'll be interested to see what the best ways, and maybe that's not good enough, but it's possible. You know, it's at least worth considering, particularly since in Modern you can still play with, Eldrazi Temple.
I think that the interplay between these Emerge cards and Eldritch Evolution is going to be one of the key questions to address in Standard, and maybe other formats, because these guys, they don't really cost 8, right? They cost 4. But they count as an 8 for purpose of getting an Ulamog or Kozilek. I don't know. How many colors do we play? Do you think that... I guess... I think Teamer could be good. I think Jund could be good. I think I want to play with Red still. If I'm going to go this direction. I don't know.
You're talking about in Modern?
I was talking about in Standard.
In Standard?
Yeah.
Well, which ones? Are you talking about Elder Deep Fiend specifically, not Distended Mindbender?
Well, both of them, right? One of them would be Teamer, and the other one would be Jund, if I played with Red.
And why do you want Red?
Goblin Dark Dweller, primarily.
You're always on the Goblin.
I love Goblin Dark Dweller. It's my 2016 version of Evolutionary League.
I don't know that there's anything wrong with that.
I mean, think about it. Just getting some of these cards into the graveyard and flashing them back with Goblin Dark Dweller is a sweet move.
So what do you think about in...
Well, you think these are 2 color cards?
No.
Green, blue.
Open to a lot of different possibilities. I mean, this Decimator of Provinces, you got to go wide. Distended Mindbender looks to me like you're playing some sort of aggressive deck. It's the most Eldrazi looking of them, like Thought Not Seer type of business. Elder Deep Fiend,
great ability, right?
Elder Deep
doesn't
Fiend
want that ability on turn 4.
Elder Deep Fiend is it's a whole new series of archetypes. You don't have to be like doing anything fancy or weird at all to want to Elder Deep Fiend. But
it could just be a tempo blue deck, right? Like Reflector Mage is a fine man to sacrifice the Elder Deep Fiend.
Sure, absolutely. I think that one question to consider is there any way to abuse a merge with some kind of act of treason type effect?
It starts getting expensive if you're doing that.
5 mana, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the payoff is enormous, though.
Like, is there I mean, maybe maybe it's just not worth playing some kind of an act of treason type of thing. But my God, is it satisfying the thought of stealing your Goblin Dark Dweller, bashing you with it, and then sacrificing it to play one of these Eldrazi?
Are there any passive or free active treasons in Standard?
So the only real options besides actual active treason are Dragonlord Silumgar, Eldrazi Obligator.
That's a good man.
Which is kind of on theme and passive. And then there's some kind of bad ones. I mean, there's a Madness one, Malevolent Whispers.
Does that have a base cost? The base cost
is so high,
right?
Yeah. I mean, there's some weird random ones, but I think for the spirit of what you're looking for, Eldrazi Obligator is your man. Now, it does cost a ton, but I could imagine an Eldrazi Obligator deck just randomly having Distended Mindbender or Elder Deep Fiend in it. And you're just playing like an Eldrazi aggro or an Eldrazi mid-rangey sort of strategy, and sometimes you do some fancy things.
I can get behind that. I think I'm going to think about this. I've always liked Threatens for Constructed, maybe a little bit more than I should.
There's a couple black cards that I kind of wanted to get your take on. If we could, Crypt Breaker, the new 1-drop zombie, black for a 1/1, tap and pay a colorless and a black, discard a card to put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. And it also has tap 3 untapped zombies you control, you draw a card, and lose a life. And it's notable that the second ability doesn't require tapping the Crypt Breaker, and the first ability puts the zombie into play untapped.
Yeah. Other thing with the second ability, you can do it even if the Crypt Breaker has Summoning Sickness.
Right, so on turn 2 or 3, you could just drop Crypt Breaker and cantrip immediately if you were so inclined.
Yep.
You may be missing some damage, though.
It depends on what the most the most flexible thing to do in that game is. Sometimes damage is right, sometimes grinding is right.
So what is it you're planning on doing with the Crypt Breaker?
Playing it. This card. I mean, you could play this card in a heavy zombie deck. It could actually be the only zombie in your deck, right? That's a possible scenario also, because the Crypt Breaker makes zombies, which are the fuel to the second ability.
You only need to make 2 zombies. As a reminder, you only need to make 2 zombies because the Crypt Breaker could just be one of the 3 zombies involved.
Yeah, it's just like a completely reasonably costed Madness outlet, too.
I think I might actually be slightly cooler on Crypt Breaker. I think it's a good card, and it's exactly the kind of card that's going to trick me into making all kinds of decks based around it. But I guess I just kind of suspect that this ends up being not what the format is really about. It's a sweet card, and it might be. I mean, the card is very appealing. It just my spidey sense is tingling that between stuff like Fiery Impulse or Kozilek's Return or whatever, that somebody's going to want to go over the top of this. But I think it's going to be a solid card that is a nice addition to any kind of a zombie or madness deck. And I think zombie or madness decks are going to be a lot more real after this set. I think this set pushes a lot of the tribal stuff a great deal.
I think this card is very good. Again, echoing your sentiment on it being probably in a zombie deck. We haven't seen a great zombie deck in Standard yet, right?
Right.
But maybe this one will help. I think this one's a keeper, and I would say based on our sometimes bar of will this make top 8 of an open or better? I'm guessing this will make top 8 of an open or better.
Well, so what do you think about in terms of some of these black decks for enabling a new archetype? What do you think of Liliana's Elite? It's a little more. I mean, it's a little unassuming, but it's 2 and a black for a 1/1 zombie that gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. So it's basically it's like Boneyard Worm, but for 1 more mana and +1/+1. But it's a zombie.
It's very Lurgoy-ish, right? So it's actually a great card to be the last card that you play, especially after the opponent has spent a lot of his resources killing your stuff. Right? It's just awesome for your first card to play after a Wrath, for example. Right? It's always going to... Not always. It has a low floor. Did we decide that was a low floor? It could be a 1/1 for 3, but it's often going to be like a 4/4 or better for 3. And I think if you just look at it like that, it's a pretty decent card.
Do you think there's any chance that people will play Prying Questions? It's 2 and a black. Target opponent loses 3 life and puts a card from his or her hand on top of his or her library. What a kick in the pants this card is.
This card is like 2/3 of a Lightning.
But it's no hope. When you Prying Questions, it's like a lava spike that can time walk the person, right? Like they don't get any hope.
Yeah.
They miss their draw step. Isn't that... You're not into it, huh?
I'm not... No, but I'm cool.
Lava Spike doesn't immediately say, I want to deny my opponent draw steps. That's
Lava
not the natural...
Spike costs 1. This costs 3. And I don't know. I think maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe I'm being the guy who questions, accumulated knowledge being a sorcery now. Because to me, this is 2/3 of a Blightning.
You want a Blightning? How about Whispers of Emrakul, the new Hymn to Turok? It's 1 and a black for a sorcery. Target opponent discards a card at random. And then it has Delirium of Hymn to Turok. Sorry.
So, I'm cool on this one also. I think at the point that you're reliably going to have the Delirium, they might not have very many cards. That's the... Or, things that make them discard 2 cards are low power. That at the point that you have Delirium, they're doing much bigger things than being disrupted as a 2 for 1 for 2. Although just the number of cards that force the opponent to discard a card at random are few and far between these days. So maybe it's powerful. Almost always somebody gets to choose, right? Typically them.
I'm not into it, but it's an option. It's not the worst.
Would you main deck this card? Probably not, right?
I mean, I think you'd have to be the type of individual who sits down at a table with a smallpox deck. If that's just in your range, then I think Whispers of Emrakul might be a thing to explore. What do you think about Stromkirk Condemned? Black for a 2/2 vampire horror, and it has discard a card, vampires you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Activate this ability only once per turn.
I mean, obviously, if there's such thing as a black vampires deck in Standard, this is going to be close to the front of the list. I think it's really, really good in certain contexts. And in terms of its floor, it's like a 2/2 that can discard a card to make itself +1/+1.
Right, that is a relatively high floor.
Yeah, it's good.
And it's on Tribe. There's other vampire rewards, This card is very exciting to me. The fact that you could, in a black vampire deck, actually be able to play Vampire Aristocrat for 1, the Indulgent Aristocrat for 1, Stromkirk Noble and Falkenrath Aristocrat the fact that they're or Heir to Falkenrath, I guess he's called, that you can play them for 2 and have these 2 different 2-cost reliable discard outlets for your Vampire aggro deck that are efficient. And then also having nice Madness cards, like the fact that you have the Asylum, the Asylum Visitor as an extra way to keep fueling yourself and just sort of an efficient rate threat. And then there's this new one, Valdarin Pariah. Is 3 black for a 3/3 flying vampire horror. You can sacrifice 3 other creatures to transform Valdarin Pariah. And she also has black madness. So to start with, you have a 5-mana 3/3 flyer. Not impressive, right? And then
3-mana 3/3 flyer. A little.
Now we're talking. Now we're starting to get into some Herald of Torment type of space, right? But then the fact that you can just for 0 mana sacrifice 3 other creatures at instant speed to transform Valdarin Pariah. And when she transforms, she's instantly a 6/5 flyer. And whenever this creature transforms into Abolisher of Bloodlines, target opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. So for 0 mana at instant speed, you can sacrifice 3 things to edict your opponent 3 times. You're going to decimate their board. And you just have a 6/5 flyer now. And it might even just be turn 3 or 4.
I think this card is spectacular.
I mean, this has got to be one of the big reasons to play like a mono black Vampire Madness deck, right? Like this is like.
Oh, those 2 cards together are like the glue. I think if that deck is a real thing.
Plus, Valdarin Pariah costs exactly 5. That is so freaking perfect. Because if you have a Valdarin Pariah and you madness it out on turn 3, on turn 4 you can bash your opponent and play a Mindbender, right? A Distended Mindbender. But you could also on turn 5 just drop Valdarin Pariah that turn for 3 mana off of one of your discard outlets, and then immediately Distended Mindbender your opponent. And I don't know that you're going to want a Distended Mindbender, but you might. It's a thing that, like, for instance, let's say you have an extra Drana, Liberator of Malachor. You can discard, because she's a legend, you might have multiples. Drana on turn 3 is an easy thing to potentially Distended Mindbender. You're like, oh, I liked my Drana in play. Sure, you're going to love a Distended Mindbender. And Valdarin Pariah, and I don't know how much Distended Mindbender you want. It's even possible that you Distended Mindbender on the sideboard. But I could imagine this allowing your black deck to have a little bit more power and staying power. Because if you Distended Mindbender, like if you're just playing this black aggro deck against like a red-green Eldrazi deck, and they just go turn 3 Kozilek's Return, turn 5, turn 3 Kozilek's Return, turn 4 Explosive Vegetation, and start doing stuff like Chandra into like World Breaker, it's kind of annoying. But if you on turn 4 Distended Mindbender and take their 2 of their ramp spells, I mean, you're going to really stunt their growth.
I agree.
But mainly, I just want to Valdarin Pariah people in order to just triple edict them. That seems disgusting.
I think that is. I mean, the reason that I think that is super disgusting is because they could have an awesome creature or 3. Like, they could have Kozilek, or no, they could have an Ulamog, a World Breaker, and a friend. They could have an Ulamog and a Profane Prince, and I don't know. like, look at how indestructible my guys are. Sorry.
They can't have Brizella. I guess Valdarin Pariah could just already be in play. If you just have Valdarin Pariah in play, and your opponent just drops Brizella and Ulamog, I guess Ulamog they'd have to already have in play. Either way, we're starting to get kind of out there, but this card seems sick.
I think this card's spectacular. So, I just wanted to dial back from a couple weeks ago to close it off. I know we mostly talked about black and red cards today, but we had a question around, was it the Lancers, and would they have a legendary land?
Oh, yeah.
There's a legendary land, so the Lancers can go get a land.
And it's good.
Yeah. Gyre Reach Sanitarium is a legendary land. It's rare. It has the ability to tap for colorless, which is, a thing that you often want to do these days. It has an additional ability, which is 2 tap. Each player draws a card, then discards a card. So
this one, quite exciting for any kind of a madness deck or any kind of a deck with graveyard interactions. But it's also just a really appealing source of colorless mana potentially for a deck with some Eldrazi creatures. And then finally, it's an easy one-of for every Thalia's Lancers deck. The fact that you can just use Gaia Reach Sanitarium as a way to ensure that your creature can help you keep ramping all the way up to your 7-drop. I mean, that's an easy one-of.
And I agree. And then subtly, we're talking about decks with the Lancers, probably with the Legendary Angel package. They're going to have a bunch of potentially high casting cost clunky stuff. So the ability to discard those clunky cards and kind of fix your hand, that's a welcome ability a lot of the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, besides, if you play Thalia's Lancer when you have 5 mana and go get the Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and then on turn 6 you drop the Sanitarium and ship the turn with no other board, maybe they even dealt with the Lancer, on your opponent's end step, you might activate Gaia Reach Sanitarium and discard 1/2 of the Angel and an Angel combo to get Brazella.
Yep. Absolutely.
The fact that you can just, if your opponent, you could have nothing, and you could just instant speed during your opponent's end step, being able to discard Gisela, the Broken Blade, when they weren't expecting it, so that when you drop Bruna, the Fading Light, they're just wrecked. That's going to be a powerful form of pressure that is put on the metagame. I think that land is going to be a good one. Good one-of in a lot of decks.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's a lot of really exciting different kinds of strategies that we haven't seen. Like, obviously, some of the strategies that we have seen for the past couple of months are going to remain viable. But we have, like, these meld decks, legendary white decks, potentially, like, zombie decks, zombie madness, potentially vampires, vampire madness. Vampires could be black, or vampires could be red. Vampires could be both. There's, maybe some burn decks, or, both low or medium burn decks, maybe with cards that cost 2, but look like they cost 8, or cards that cost 5, and generally cost 5. But so a lot of new interesting things going to be on the horizon for us to brew with and try.
Definitely encourage everybody, shoot us messages of which cards you want us to brew with. Next week is the big one. Next week is the week before the pre-release. So any cards you want discussed, any decks you want us to brainstorm on, shoot us a line either on Twitter, Top Level Podcast, or our Facebook page, or you can follow us on Patreon, and let us know what you want us to look at, which cards and which strategies. And definitely thank you for joining us this week, and thank you for joining us every week that you're here.
Yep.
It is a true pleasure.
So I just want to shout out to Brian Moriarty from our Patreon page.
Thanks, you, Brian.
Great show. I'm Michael J. Flores.
I'm Patrick Chapin. See you guys next week.
Tried to play Dredge, he's a jailer, hey. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber space.